Hey everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make this little bunny stuffed animal using socks. This is very similar to my mini teddy bear video I did a while ago, and that was pretty popular, so I figured I'd do a bunny for the spring. Now let's get started! Okay, first, please ignore the state of my nails. This was a few days after I did them and they were already a mess. But I tried to make them look like those bubblegum eggs that I used to love, so comment below if you've had those. Okay, all the fabric I'm going to need for this is coming from a fuzzy sock. I found some extra long ones at Daiso, so something like this should be able to make the whole bunny, but if you are using just regular fuzzy socks, you'll probably need both. Of course, you could totally use your old ones, but I wanted to make sure it was camera ready for the video. I'm going to be using some of these printable patterns I made to help me out. I'll have these linked in the description box. They're really similar to the teddy bear one if you've made that. So I'm taking my first piece that's going to be for the head and placing that on the toe of the sock and cutting that out. And the next piece is going to be for the body, and I'm going to place this down by the heel so that way when I stuff this, it'll kind of be the butt and help it sit up. So I'm just going to make sure that the legs kind of stick out past that heel. And I think this pattern will match up perfectly for most fuzzy socks. And because this material is a little bit trickier to sew, I forgot to mention I've already turned the sock inside out, and now with the pattern pinned on, I'm just going to sew directly around it and then cut it out after. So I'm mainly starting where the feet start and using a straight stitch on my sewing machine. Okay, quick background change since I just realized it was going to be white on white, so might as well make it a little more fun. And how cute is this strawberry fabric? I love it. Okay, so you can't really tell, but I've already sewed around my pattern, so I can just remove the pins and pull the pattern out if it was sewn on a little bit. And now I can just trim around it with scissors. I'm making sure to cut around 1/4 inch away from my stitches. Now I can turn it inside out and start stuffing it. I happen to already have the polyfill stuffing, so that's what I'm using, but you can always use fabric scraps or yarn scraps if you don't have it. I'm making sure I get those legs really stuffed so they stick out enough. Once it's stuffed as much as you want, I'm grabbing a needle and thread and sewing this up. With fuzzy socks, there can be a lot of gaps within the fabric, so your knot might just slip right through. So if that happens, as you're pulling the thread through and getting towards the end, just insert that in between the two threads where the knot is at the end, and that way it should latch onto the fabric and you can go on. To close this, I'm just going to do a really simple running stitch. So that's just going into one side of the fabric, pulling through, then a little distance away from that, going back in through the opposite side. And to make this faster, you don't have to pull your needle through all the way every single time. You can just gather them all on your needle like I'm doing and then pull through after a few. I'm going to do that along the entire opening, and once I get to the end, I can pull my thread and it should close up that hole. And there's no need to close it up completely because the head's going to be sewn on top, but you can add a few stitches across the opening if you want to close it up even more. When I'm done, I'm going to lock my stitch, and to do that, I'm going to insert my needle really anywhere, and as you're pulling it, you'll want to insert your needle through the loop that forms. It's a little hard to see with the white thread, but I'm pretty sure I've done this plenty of times in other videos. I'm going to set aside the body for now to work on stuffing the head. So I'm just adding stuffing to this toe piece until the head is as big as I want. So you can make this a lot smaller by just using less stuffing, and you might just have some extra fabric at the bottom. Once it's around the size I want, I'm going to start sewing this closed the same way I did for the body. So I'm just going to do a running stitch all the way around the top. Now that it's almost finished, I'm trying it on the body to see if it's the right size, because at this point I could still add or remove stuffing. And once it looks right, I'm going to just pull this all the way tight and then lock my stitch like I did before. I love how this kind of looks like a little dumpling. Next, I'm going to cut out the pieces for the arms. This one on the right was going to be for the ear, but it was too small, so I'm going to end up changing that and cutting it out later. But for the arm, I'm obviously going to need 2 of these. And you want to cut it out on 2 layers of fabric. So if you just pin it to the sock and cut it out, you should already have 2 layers. And if you cut it out really close to the side, you can leave one side connected, which makes things easier. I already have my pieces flipped good side to good side, so I'm just going to sew around that edge, leaving the bottom part open. Once I've done that to both, I can turn those inside out. And sewing this kind of fabric is kind of tricky, so I'm also just checking to make sure there aren't any holes where I sewed too close to the edge, because then I just have to redo that part. Now I can just stuff both of these. Next, I'm going to get back to those ears, which I haven't cut out yet because that initial pattern I did was too small, and I want some big floppy ears on this bunny. So again, I'm cutting out 2 layers of this, and then I obviously need 2 ears. And this sock would have been perfect for me if I hadn't already messed up with the first ear. So I did have to cut the second one out of the second sock. But again, if you are using smaller socks, you'll probably have to use both. Okay, now this time I'm leaving the good side facing out. Again, they look similar, so it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to sew around the curved edge, leaving the flat edge open. Here is what it looks like when it's done, and I actually liked the look of a more flat ear like this, as opposed to turning it inside out. It would make it kind of puffy on the edges. It's totally up to you whether you want to turn this inside out, but I liked it better like this. So I'm just quickly trimming up the rough edges to make it look neater. After doing the same thing for the other ear, I'm going to sew up the top before adding this to the head. So I basically just folded over that top edge and then started doing a running stitch along there. And then once I got to the end, I tried to pull it pretty tight to make that top edge more narrow. Then I locked my stitch to keep everything in place. Now, without cutting my thread off, I'm going to look for where I want to put this on the head. And once I found a good place, I'm going to sew this on using a whip stitch. This is also a super easy stitch. The main thing is your needle is always entering through the same side of the fabric. So for me, I have the ear and the head. It's always going through the head and then into the ear. This isn't super technical though. I was really just doing whatever was easiest for me to put this on, but the fabric doesn't show the stitches easily anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Once I get to the front of the ear, I'm really trying to tuck that edge in so it's not, a super harsh ending. And then I'm going to flip it up and sew together that bottom part of the ear. And again, I'm just using a whip stitch for this. And it might be good to flip it back over and just check how it's looking, because sometimes the ears can lay a little bit awkward and you might want to sew down further so it kind of is stuck to the head more, but I ended up doing that later. Now I can just do the same thing for the other ear. Here is how it looked when it was done. I wish I could have gotten it more, directly at the top of the head, but it's okay. The area with more space is going to be the face anyway. And the next thing I need to cut out for the face is going to be its kind of cheek nose area. I don't know exactly what to call it, but I did kind of want this to match the bear I made, and he had the same kind of nose situation. So I'm using the same pattern I used for his, or at least I thought I did, because once I started sewing this on, I realized this was a little bit smaller, and I would have liked it a little bit bigger, so the bigger version is what I'm going to include in the printable pattern. Okay, to sew this on, I'm going to be using something called a ladder stitch this time. And it basically involves just doing a single running stitch into one side of the fabric, so in this case the face, and then doing a running stitch into the other piece, so for me it would be the cheek. And I am kind of trying to tuck that edge under as I go, but I'm not sure it's really making a difference, so you can just do what's easiest for you. So as you can see, I'm just doing a running stitch in the cheek, a running stitch in the head, and going back and forth until I go all the way around. But before I fully close it up, I'm going to add a little bit of stuffing. Once it's as full as I want it, I can continue the ladder stitch to close this up, and then lock my stitch. Now I'm going to sew on the nose with some embroidery floss, but you could obviously do this other ways, like cutting one out of felt and just attaching it. But I do really like this method. I'm entering my needle through the bottom of the head, since that'll really hide that knot, and then just kind of going around to where I want the nose to be. And then I can actually decide where I want that top line to be, and just push my needle through to the other side where I want the line to end. So in this case, my needle will always be going in through the right side and coming out the left, and that'll create all the lines I need to make this upside down triangle. So I'm just going to keep creating lines under this first one and make them shorter and shorter so it turns into a triangle. And you might notice the lines are shorter than you expect, so you can always go back over them and get that exact shape you want. I also went back over the top to clean them up and make them all look straighter. Once I'm done, I'm just going to do one vertical line below the nose that isn't necessarily connecting to a mouth, but I just really like this look. And then I can lock my stitch at the bottom of the head. Next, I'm going to add the eyes, and I'm essentially just using black circular beads for this, but I ended up making mine with some black polymer clay that I just rolled into a ball, poked a hole into, and baked. So they aren't perfect, but faster than going to the store and buying black beads. You could always make the eyes using felt or even just trying to tie a knot through like some really thick string. And they might still end up tiny, but you might want that look too. Okay, so once I've determined where I'm going to place the eyes, I'm going to again enter in through the bottom of the head and go to where I want the eye to be. Then I can add my bead onto the needle and then put my needle really close to where basically it originally came out of, so the bead will cover that stitch. And I'm pushing the needle straight through to the other side so I can add the other eye. And then I'm going back through to the other side and pulling it pretty tight to give it a little bit more of an indentation where the eyes are. And then just to make sure it's extra secure, I'm going back through the bead and then into the other side and doing the same thing before bringing it back down to the bottom of the head and locking my stitch. Now the head is officially done and I can finish up the body. Next, I'm going to attach the arms, and similar to what I did with the teddy bear, I wanted them pretty high up, pretty close to the neck to kind of hide where it's stitched on. I didn't think I put it too high up, but if I were to do this again, I'd make them a little lower to make it look more natural. This time I'm using kind of a combination of like a regular running stitch straight across the shoulder and a whip stitch towards the end. I don't really know why, I guess I should have just done a whip stitch the whole time. But then similar to the ear, I'm also going to sew under the arm, and this time I'm going to use a ladder stitch. So I'm doing a running stitch through the arm, then a running stitch through the body, and doing that across the arm. And this is the one where I should have sewed it down lower because the arms were just kind of sticking out to the side, which looked a little goofy, so you'll see I did end up fixing that later. So I'm doing the same thing for the other arm, and like I said, they are sticking out a lot, so I'm going to just add a few more stitches further down on the body and further down on the underside of the arm. And I made sure to do that to the other arm too, and it looks a lot better. Now the last thing to do before sewing on the head is adding the tail. I wasn't exactly sure what kind of tail I wanted, so I first tried one using a circle of the sock fabric, and then I just did a running stitch around that and added a tiny scrap of sock in there to be the stuffing. And then I can just pull it tight and lock my stitch. But here were the other tail options I was deciding between. The biggest one is a pom-pom I made, which I've shown in other videos before. And the smallest one is just a store-bought pom-pom I had lying around. And if you caught it in the intro, I did eventually go with the biggest pom-pom. I did really like the look of the sock pom-pom though. To sew it on, I'm making sure to put my needle through the entire pom-pom because nothing, in the very edge of it will hold the needle. Then I'm just sewing that where I want it, making sure to not put it too low that it can't sit up. I was running low on threads, so to lock it, I just cut it with a long tail and then tied the two threads together. Now it is finally time to add the head to the body, and I love how the body already kind of looks like it could be a bunny on its own if you added eyes here, so maybe that's a different plushie idea. But to sew this on, I'm going to again use ladder stitch, and I like to start in the front where I can really make sure the head is on straight, because if you start in the back there is a little bit of a risk of it moving and suddenly it's turning its head a little bit, which is kind of what happened with my bear. But for this first round, I'm really just kind of roughly trying to attach it, and then I'm going to go around one more time later to be more careful. But as you can see, I'm just doing a running stitch in the head, then a running stitch in the body. Once the head is fully attached, for me it was a little bit kind of bobbleheadish, it's wobbling a little bit, and it doesn't really have a neck, but I'd prefer for where it's attached to be a wider area. So this time I'm stitching a little bit higher up on the head to kind of squish them together more. And after locking my stitch, this bunny plush is finally done. It sits up really well on its own, especially with that tail to support it. And I did decide to add a little ribbon around her neck because it just kind of reminded me of one of those bunny stuffed animals you get in an Easter basket. So I know this is too late for Easter, but this would be a cute thing to add to an Easter basket. Whenever I tie bows, to get them to look right, I always have to do them upside down and then they end up the right way. So that's probably just me not tying a bow correctly though. But now this bunny stuffed animal out of a sock is officially done. I think she turned out super cute, and I hope whoever requested this tries it out. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. Please give it a like, comment any video requests you have, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll see you next time. Bye!